This bird, Phoenix, who, according to a belief which Herodotus heard at Heliopolis in Egypt, visited that place once in every 500 years on his father's death and buried him in the sanctuary of Helos. For this purpose, Phoenix was believed to come from Arabia and to make an egg of myrrh as large as possible. This egg he then hollowed out and put into his father, closing it up carefully. And the egg was believed to then be of exactly the same weight as before. This bird was represented resembling an eagle, with feathers partly red and partly golden. Of this bird, it is further related that when his life drew to a close, he built a nest for himself in Arabia, to which he imparted the power of generation, so that after his death, a new phoenix rose out of it. As soon as the latter was grown up, he, like his predecessor, proceeded to Heliopolis in Egypt and burned and buried his father in the temple of Helos. According to a story which has gained more currency in modern times, Phoenix, when he arrived at a very old age, some say 500 and others say 1461 years, committed himself to the flames. Others again state that only one phoenix lived at a time, and that when he died, a worm crept forth from his body and was developed into a new phoenix by the heat of the sun. His death, further, took place in Egypt after a life of 7,006 years. Another modification of the same story relates that when Phoenix arrived at the age of 500 years, he built for himself a funeral pile consisting of spices, settled upon it, and died. Out of the decomposing body, he then rose again, and having grown up, he wrapped the remains of his old body up in myrrh, carried them to Heliopolis, and burnt them there. Similar stories of marvelous birds occur in many parts of the East, as in Persia. The legend of the Bimorg, and in India of the bird of the Semindar.
Heavy load
Recording
of tears, of healing powers.
Professor Dumbledore, sir. Wait.
One of the volunteer opportunities that have come my way in the past year is to serve as a good officer specializing in call and contract negotiations. Good officers are volunteers who help other ministers who are in need of help in some capacity. For the longest time, good officers were generalists elected by their local chapters. They acted as a kind of minister to ministers, if you will. Nowadays, as in so many things in life, things are more towards specialization, and the Unitarian Universalist Minister Association just this past year is starting to have some portion of these good officers act as specialists, which means that not only do I have to do the work of helping ministers leaving their churches, but I have to be on the committee that envisions how to teach the thing I'm doing as well. So a lot of difficult work, but a very fulfilling ministry for me. Now, if you're a little confused about all that organizational stuff, let me put it in the simplest possible terms. I work with ministers who, in most cases, are being asked by their congregations they serve to leave, usually by their board. As a good officer, I advise and represent the minister in that negotiation and eventual resignation. It is a hard time for all parties involved, and often the low point in a minister's career. It is not a fatal blow by any means, but it is a huge loss and often comes unexpected. One of the important roles of the good officer is not just to talk about kind of the legalistic stuff with contracts and all that, but also to be pastoral. Half of the gig is helping ministers come to grips with what is happening to them. It is scary and confusing. Some fight too long. Having weathered storms in the past, they figure they can weather this one too. Others become emotionally devastated. It's a traumatic experience, to be sure, but some never find it in themselves to come back from that experience. They linger over it, extracting blame and fault too widely and too generously. I've seen it happen to colleagues and with alarming frequency, even some of my dear friends. When I'm counseling a minister who's going through this experience of being asked to leave, there's one thing that I make a point to tell them. And it's a line from Ming Dao Den, who did our meditation this morning. It's not from that meditation, but he's got another one that says, whether we remain the ash or become the phoenix is up to us. I sometimes phrase it a little bit more of a command than what Deng does, and I actually say, be the phoenix, not the ash. In other words, do something with this. Don't let this moment define you or your ministry. Come back transformed somehow. It may look different, but different does not always have to be a bad thing. I think resilience is one of those most prized spiritual gifts of this past year. Resilience and its close cousin, patience, have been thrust upon us, whether we wished it or not. We have been forced to be patient. And in a sense, we may even have been forced to be resilient, because the only other option is the ash, to fall apart, to be devastated or destroyed. And those are just not options. It certainly wasn't for me. And I know I've told this story before, so I appreciate your patience in hearing it again. In 2018, my marriage had ended. I didn't see my kids as often as I would like. I had some health problems that arose around then as well. These were super hard issues to deal with, and I didn't even notice depression and anxiety creeping in around the edges of my life and work until about halfway through that church year. Eventually, the San Antonio church asked me to resign, which I did. What I just started to realize, though, in those crucial months was that my life as I had known it was coming to an end. The question before me was, what is next? Which was why I needed a sabbatical. I needed time to not be distracted so I could focus on my spiritual and emotional healing. And also, it would not have been fair to serve a congregation with anything less than 100%. So that when I came to be among you, there were questions. Should I even be doing ministry anymore? I had a number of family and friends answering that question with a resounding no. Go do something else. Why are you torturing yourself with this? Did I have the temperament, the skills, the desire, the call to come back to ministry? I knew that if I did come back, it would have to be different. I would need to be a phoenix, coming back from the ashes, but looking and doing ministry differently. Certainly, that year was no picnic around here. This was all happening to me at the same time that Reverend Leanne Washington was here, her conflicted ending and some of the conflicts that spun off from her departure. With little time to process all of that, the pandemic hit. Worship and all church meetings went virtual. I heard mixed reactions to this when I had my conversations with you last fall. You may remember me making Zoom appointments with basically everyone in the directory at the time. Some lamented not being able to process Reverend Washington's departure, some of those other conflicts in the moment. Others were kind of grateful for a little bit of a cooling off period. Still others noted that the pandemic meant that we were united. It was all hands on deck And actually, that common challenge was exactly what was needed in that moment to bring people together. It was extremely interesting to hear these stories. I talked to Reverend Washington for nearly 2 hours and took 10 pages of notes, I think. What I learned from all those stories, from her, from all of you, from all of those perspectives is this: whether we are the phoenix or the ash is up to us. Some folks saw what happened as a fire that destroyed something precious. They left. All church conflicts have a cost to be paid in one or more of what I call the 3 M's: money, members, and mojo. Add a pandemic to the tail end of that, and a big conflict like that, and you have even more members potentially leaving, more money in terms of pledges and rentals not coming in, and the mojo on our wane, our congregational energy, vitality, and passion. Most of it gets sucked into just getting one more virtual service done, and the tank gets left dry. Back-to-back major crises takes a toll on anyone in any church of any size. That is what UUCHV has not only endured, but we have come out the other end renewed. The question is, was that conflict a fire that devastated everything? Or was it just a burning day for the phoenix that emerges? Personally, I chose to be the phoenix. That's not an easy decision. In fact, it's actually the harder of the 2 options. It's easy to give up. Sometimes giving up is the only logical thing to do, but I just couldn't. There was something calling me back to ministry. Maybe it was the calling, as we say. It was certainly a sense of being compelled. It was a of course I'm going back kind of feeling. But that feeling didn't change the fact that there aren't things that need to be proven. For me, one of the things that I had to see if I could do was preaching, especially over the internet. Talk about things they didn't prepare us for in seminary. The internet was, it's dating me, but to say it was barely around when I was in seminary. For that matter, can I do ministry face-to-face again? All those little moments of ministry that happen in the edges that are so important can only happen in real life. You can't Zoom informally. I tried. The pastoral intuition that only comes from real life interactions is something I'm still curious about as we transition back to being more in person. I learned this year that if people are mad at you, you have to go talk to them directly. I knew this before, but didn't practice it as intentionally as I did this year. And I can't tell you how hard it is to do that in the moment and how grateful I was to myself for having done so. So much heartache and misunderstanding and hurt feelings get avoided whenever we have a face-to-face direct conversation. It helps to build trust and accountability, and it strengthens our covenant. The other lesson I learned from being a Phoenix is don't sweat the small stuff. It's interesting to learn about and become part of a small congregation. I once compared a minister of a small congregation to being the lifeguard at the pool where someone's having a family reunion. My job's to keep everybody safe, having a good time. Hopefully they'll invite me to part of some of the family reunions, some of the party at some point. I like to think that even though I have been away physically from you guys, that you've let me into your hearts a bit. I believe after this crazy year, we've come together and now I'm part of this extended family. Like I said before, it's a crazy time here at the church. But you too have chosen to be the phoenix instead of the ash. The searing heat of conflict has not destroyed you, but merely burnt away ragged feathers and dull talons. You too have had a phoenix-like year, maybe 2 years. I've heard your stories and witnessed your growth. Sure, conflict and a pandemic have exacted a cost in terms of those 3 M's of money, members, and mojo, but That doesn't mean that there isn't growth in other ways too. There is a group of incredibly dedicated volunteers in this church that do amazing amounts of work, both in terms of quantity and quality, and there are too few of them. Somehow we need to even out those responsibilities and not rely on a few superheroes to carry the day. Because inevitably relying on a few super volunteers burns them out. And that's been a pattern for a long, long time. But man, oh man, do you guys punch above your weight class. More often than I would have expected. It's a tremendous achievement that both worship and religious education have happened so consistently and so well this year. It's a testimony certainly to our volunteers, but also to our RE program. Jane, who's with us virtually now, I believe, Jane Padell is a talented DRE and one of the true gems of this congregation. No doubt we would not have come through the other side of this year without Jane's calm and talented leadership. I've seen that when this congregation gets focused on something, you can do amazing things. In fact, the biggest obstacle is usually the first task, getting and maintaining focus. In a world where everything has seemed to be on fire, from the pandemic to the election to racial tensions in the nation to economic and environmental crises, the world seems like it's having its own burning. The temptations to run around and try to fix it all at the same time. However, when we liberals do that, we kind of wind up dividing and conquering ourselves. Focus on a few things. Say no. However hard it may be to say no, say it to things that are not your focus. That's called drawing a boundary, something that's kind of been a theme of this year. You know who you are by knowing who you're not. And when I've seen you achieve that focus, you can move mountains. The last Phoenix lesson I think we've learned and are continuing to learn is that the minister is on your side. It's understandable to have trust issues with the new minister, given all that happened that last year, and in some cases, maybe even going back further. I understand some hesitancy to letting a new minister into your heart. Can he be trusted? Is he going to listen non-defensively? If I have a pastoral need, can I go to him and he'll know what he's doing? Can I trust his vision for the congregation moving forward? Will he give good advice to our lay leaders? All very important questions, particularly coming out of that big conflict. The answer to all of them is yes. Hopefully you've experienced them as yes. There were definite moments when I think folks were a little skittish around me, having been hurt badly in the recent past. Some jumped to conclusions about what I might say or think on a particular issue based perhaps more on my predecessors than on me. That is super, super common during ministerial transitions. So I just want to say, a few months ago, I was talking to my dear friend Bill, who serves the congregation in Princeton, New Jersey. This was over Zoom, of course. And we were reflecting a little bit on what it's been like to do ministry in the pandemic, how well we were doing or not doing, how well our churches were holding up. And I said something to him, I think surprised him a bit, but it was certainly what I felt then, and I think I feel it even more so now. I said, you know, I'm glad I got to do ministry in a pandemic. It would have driven me crazy to be on the sidelines, not serving a church while everyone else was in the thick of the fray. This is and has been the challenge of our generation, meeting this pandemic head on. It is the defining moment when we get to demonstrate to history how well we understand and practice Unitarian Universalism. Will we curl up and die, be relegated to the ash heap of history, literally? Or do we rise to the occasion? Do we use all that stuff we ministers learned, all of the resilience that's in our lay and professional leaders, all the vision and creativity that we have extolled from our pulpits, and the virtues from our pulpits for so long. Take all those gifts and see what happens when we meet the dreadful costs, the difficult challenges, the harsh crises of the spirit that have come from this pandemic. No way am I missing out on the opportunity to be a part of that. This is our Selma, I told Bill. How well do we practice this faith? Not just on paper, but in real life. I would want to be nowhere else this past year but doing that. We have arisen from the ashes stronger, both as a minister and as a congregation. Next year, we see what we will do with those spiritual lessons we have learned. I look forward to meeting that challenge with all of you in the coming year. And so, dear friends, I bid you adieu for the summer. I will be on vacation in July, spending quality time with my boys in Michigan and Wisconsin. The plans to move here in August and try to fit in some study leave somewhere along the way. Remember, just because your minister isn't in the pulpit doesn't mean he's not working for you. Ministry is more than mere preaching. I will be around, and if you do need something, do not hesitate to call. It has been a true joy to be with you in person this month, and I wish you all a fantastic summer, and I will see you again in late August. Be well. I love you. Go in peace, and amen. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. May the flame which has brightened our time together light our paths as we go our separate ways. Just a reminder for those of you here in the sanctuary to join us for coffee hour, thanks to our lovely membership committee who has something prepared for us outside. Also, if you have a donation you wish to make to the offering or to the special offering recipient, the plates are right there. Chris will be monitoring this very closely. So if that check has a 0 missing, just put another 1 on the end. So thank you for your generosity.